Hola, minasan! Welcome back for the first round of Tron research. Yes, you heard that right. Tron. This Tron. The Electron. The Proton. The Neutron. Something Tron. I think I got all the Trons wrong. The third movie is coming out. The third movie, Tron Ares. It has been 20 years, nearly 20 years, since the last movie came out. It seems Disney really likes to release Tron in 20-year increments for some weird reason. And it is kind of tiring, quite honestly. If you want my honest opinion, it is very tiring. But maybe it might be a good thing, and I'll probably tell you why, and that is because of technology. It cannot be understated how important Tron technically is in the movie industry, which comes to tonight's research. Why Tron is so important from EckhartsLadder. He is going to explain why Tron is very important. And I have to say, he's not wrong. Because the techniques done in the very first Tron, no one in the movie industry has ever done again. This was a once in a lifetime deal that was done with Tron. And the fact that the Academy just treated it as a cheat with that short-sightedness, and then when the second movie came out, Legacy, they didn't even give that an award. Like, keep this in mind. Tron didn't get get nominated because they were accused of cheating the first time. Tron Legacy didn't get nominated for special effects because the special effects have now all been done. It's like this movie can't catch a break, this series. Yes, it got nominated for Daft Punk's music in the Oscars, but the fact that, it didn't get any nominations for special effects is so weird. It is very, very weird. But is it important? Well, for me, yeah. I mean, this was was a very inspirational movie, primarily because of the video games and the possibilities, But there's a lot more to it than just that, and I'm very curious as to what EckhartsLadder's take is on why it's actually important. Probably from a movie standpoint more so. For me, it was more of the video game possibilities. This is way before my writing time. Before I got into writing, like very long time. I was a little kid when I saw this movie, and really stimulated my imagination when it came to video games and so on. So we're gonna find out what it is. So, get your notes together for my post-research thoughts. This is a call to action. Comment, like, subscribe, follow, hit the notification button, and let us begin the research.
In the mid-2000s, before acquiring Marvel and Star Wars, Disney was looking for a way to capture the preteen male audience. This led to not only the purchase of properties like Power Rangers, but also big screen adaptations of Pirates of the Caribbean, Chronicles of Narnia, and The Prince of Persia.
True.
Disney was really looking for the
Persia?
next big thing, and that led to an attempted revival of a cult property from the early 1980s. In today's video, we enter the mainframe and look at the history and lore of the digital world of Tron.
Ooh, lore.
Tron was first conceived in the mid-1970s by animator Steven Lisberger. He, like many others of that time, was blown away by Pong and decided that a story featuring the world of video games would make for a great movie. Lisberger created his own production company, and an early version of the character of Tron would be featured in an animated sequence used to promote rock radio stations. This prototype Tron was yellow, designed to look like the Cylon Centurion from Battlestar Galactica, and wielded two exploding discs. The film, in early stages of development, was meant to be bookended by live-action sequences, while all the digitally set scenes would be animated. The decision was then made to utilize a combination of live action footage with backlit animation, alongside early computer-generated imagery meant to make the world of Tron look more futuristic and completely unique from anything else of that era. Although Lisberger originally planned to produce the film fully independently, the ambitious technical requirements meant that once money ran out, they turned to major studios in order to finish the film. After rejections from Columbia, MGM, and WB, the team found themselves at Disney's door. Disney was struggling in the early 1980s and saw great potential in Tron as their answer to Star Wars. Full production on the film began in 1981 after some Disney-mandated rewrites, which made the film more serious in tone and removed specific technical-sounding dialogue in order to avoid confusing and overwhelming audiences. The first Tron film follows former ENCOM employee and software developer Kevin Flynn. Flynn seeks to prove that he is the true designer of several games stolen by current ENCOM executive vice president Ed Dillinger.
I just gotta figure out how, because Ed Dillinger doesn't look young enough to. I know that when it came to arcades back then, a lot of adults played it, but I just couldn't buy that Dillinger at that age. He seems like more middle-aged, like he looks like a 40-year-old, somewhere around his like late 30s, early 40s, would be into video games at that time. 20-year-olds would have been like Kevin Flynn would most definitely be into video games. What I'm saying is, I can't see ENCOM looking at Dillinger and saying, yes, you're into video games and you made some great video games. You know what I'm saying? It always seemed a little strange to me, narrative-wise. He doesn't strike me as the type of person that would be able to produce, create and design a video game. Kevin Flynn would. If I was an executive, one of the top executives or investor, I'll be looking at him, looking at Dillinger and be like, you play video games? If I would have been looking at Kevin Flynn, I would have been like, yeah, you definitely play video games. I definitely see that.
What Flynn doesn't know, however, is that ENCOM has been taken over by a virtual intelligence known as the Master Control Program. Once Flynn's former colleagues, Alan Bradley and Laura Baines, realize he's been hacking into ENCOM, they recruit him to help activate Alan's program Tron, which was designed to combat the MCP, Master Control Program. And right there, you have the perfect setup for a hacking-based heist film. But things, of course, go awry once Flynn is inside and ends up being transported into the virtual world of the ENCOM mainframe. And this is where the world of Tron gets really weird. The inhabitants of the mainframe are humanoid beings known as programs, who typically bear a physical resemblance to the person or user who created them and have different colors signifying their ranks and beliefs. The red programs have rejected their users, their followers of the MCP, essentially corrupted programs. Yellow programs are infiltrators or hacker programs. The first version of Clue created by Flynn falls into this camp. Purple programs are known as data pushers. They don't have any real higher directive, personality, or high-level intelligence. And lastly, we have blue programs, loyal to users, or perhaps a user themselves existing within the mainframe. The MCP begins corrupting programs and forcing them to relinquish their belief in the users in order to grow in power. To combat the programs who refuse to renounce their beliefs, the MCP also forces them to compete for survival in a series of gladiatorial games. The first, known simply as Ring Game, has users throwing a glowing ball back and forth in an attempt to eliminate the rings from their opponent's surface. The second game, Disc Arena, sees the programs dueling, utilizing their identity discs to be the last program standing. Then, of course, most iconically, Light Cycle, where programs pilot bikes which leave behind a trail of light known as a jet wall. Drivers strategize in order to get their opponents to crash into a jet wall while also trying to survive themselves. The light cycle is the most well-known element from Tron, and even people who are unfamiliar with the movie likely recognize the light cycle if they're in any way tapped into current culture. The sequence itself was a defining moment for not only the film, but also for pioneering the use of computer-generated imagery. The film featured 15 minutes of CGI, which, while being very primitive, does honestly still hold up given the context of how it's used. Everything exists within the digital world of the mainframe, so the untextured, chunky models honestly never look out of place.
Well, take into consideration the time period, and how interesting it is, um, and the imagination that came out of Lisberger and many others too. William Gibson's Neuromancer comes to mind. On what would it look like being inside a computer? I mean, it's one of those big questions to ask, and how. Honestly, like I said, I was a little kid back then, but to have that kind of imagination at a time where computers were still basically as tall as where Rob is standing at, and they look like giant laundry machines and such. You know, the early days of possibilities of what a world inside, what a computer world inside would be like, and to be able to conjure it up like that, like it could have gone so many different ways. He could have said it looked just like our own, like in the case of the Matrix. I mean, this was pre-Matrix stuff. The limited knowledge of computers at that time, because we didn't fully understand computers. We just know it existed, and you put in some lines of code and it does things. That's all we knew. Those who were actually more hands-on, the computer scientists and the programmers and the builders, they understood how the lines of code worked, the algorithms, the calculating binary numbers and algorithms and such. They had the strong imagination to go with that. To take into consideration, because remember that the concept of computers have been very much prevalent for a very long time. Circuit, the very thing, the circuit, going back to the days of radio and television, even further than that with the telegraph. Where one little strand of copper wire would send a signal, and the signal could be translated into data, and translated into data on the other end. And to be able to sit there and say this is a possibility of what a virtual world will look like is nothing short of amazing. To conjure that level of imagination, because nobody comprehended this. We couldn't comprehend this back then. The possibility. Even if we had read Neuromancer, for those of us who are laymen, we wouldn't be able to comprehend what William Gibson was trying to tell us about that. Hold on a second. Hold on. Yeah. 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 It's crazy. It's crazy.
Works so well in addition to several practical techniques the filmmakers used in order to give the mainframe its unique look. All the human actors, for example, wore colorless suits filmed in black and white on all black sets. The color and signature look of the film would come by layering colored light through the film cells in a process known as backlit animation. There wasn't a production prior to Tron that was like this, but it would set the standard for how performers would react and interact with an environment like this, which would obviously translate heavily to the use of green or blue screens much later on. Technology is completely absent in the production of Tron. Anyway, with the help of Flynn, the Tron defense program is able to take the fight to the MCP, which is eventually destroyed, and Flynn is returned home. This results in Flynn also getting the evidence needed to discredit Dillinger and claim his new spot as CEO of Encom, ending the story. Now, as stated before, Disney had very high hopes for Tron, putting into 3 home console video games for the Atari 2600 and in television, while Midway would release 2 incredibly successful arcade games, Discs of Tron and the more well-known cabinet simply titled Tron. The film received mixed to positive reviews, with critics at the time hailing its achievement in special effects, but criticizing the overly complex story. At the box office, Tron grossed approximately $50 million against a $17 million budget.
I still have a hard time with that one, with the critics saying that was a complex story. I don't know how complex you can get with programmer gets zapped into an actual computer and has to defeat the MCP in order to free the computer and get his get the evidence to implicate Dillinger. I don't understand why that's complex. I to this day I don't understand the where the complexity is coming from. You know why? You know, I don't get that. You know what I'm saying? The complexity part in terms of storytelling.
Which was a moderate success and Disney's highest grossing live-action film of the time, but given their massive expectations, it was still somewhat a disappointment. This was partially due to other big blockbuster movies, including E.T., Rocky III, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Poltergeist. Tron would be remembered over the next 2 decades as a pioneer in CGI, eventually gaining a cult following, leading to Disney's revisiting of the property in a non-canon sequel video game released in 2004 titled Tron 2.0, before eventually greenlighting a sequel to the film in the mid-2000s. Tron Legacy released in late 2010 to, once again, mixed reviews and disappointing box office numbers. There's a lot to discuss with the long production and lore elements introduced in Legacy and its supplemental material, but I'll leave that for a follow-up video if you guys are interested. There's definitely a lot we could discuss, including how it's all going to lead into the next film, Tron Ares. I'm curious to see if Ares will be the first Tron movie to truly capture attention from the mainstream audiences. Legacy has had a very positive critical reassessment in the last couple of years, but I don't know if it's quite enough to get people interested in the franchise, especially with such a divisive actor like Jared Leto in the lead. When I first watched the trailer, I thought the overall aesthetic was interesting, but I was really turned off by the inclusion of Jared Leto and also the AI now moving to the real world. But I'm still hopeful the movie will be good and that we can revisit Tron again in the near future. Those are my thoughts, though. Let me know your guys' thoughts and your earliest Tron memories. For me, it was definitely playing a ripoff of the Light Cycle game on my PC as a kid. But I look forward to reading all your comments. See you next time.
Oh, what the heck is going on here? Also, I just paused on a creepypasta moment, didn't I? That is very creepypasta that I just caught there. Huh. Like I'm trying to wrap my head as to what he was trying to get at, because like I said, he spent most of the time really recapping the story, and he talked about the special effects, but he didn't say what was so important about it. You know, what was so significant. And now I'm hung up on it. You know, I'm a little bit hung up on it. And then he goes on to criticize Jared Leto. Like, honestly, I'm not really concerned about that. That's all he basically did. So, yeah, I do have a sense of the disappointment. So, let me give my take. I'm going to give my take here on why Tron was so important. Because there's a lot to talk about. You know, Tron most definitely had an impact, the likes of which we've never seen before. And basically, and I want to make sure I phrase this right, you know, because if I don't phrase it right, it could be, you know, I could misrepresent Tron. A lot of us who were kids, who got to see Tron, many of us no doubt, like myself, got inspired in different ways. This was an ambitious project by Lisberger. Okay. It was a fantastic imagination he had. And as I was trying to point out during the video, and I could really say this wholeheartedly, computers were not everyday life back then. And not just only in the 80s, but like the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, when the whole concept of computer started to become prevalent in science fiction. Metropolis was one of the earliest instances of robot. Isaac Asimov, the possibilities of going to with Jules Verne and flying to the moon. Alien life from H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. Not a single one of them could have ever considered the possibility of a world within the machine itself. When we had Star Trek, where we had the possibility of being able to travel across space, and computers were to help out. Same with Flash Gordon and many others. Even the cheesy, hokey B-movie sci-fi films. Classic ones like the day the Earth stood still. Computers were not prevalent with humans, but it was always alien technology for the most part, like majority of it. Unless we go out into space, unless it involves space, that's when computers would be at the forefront. 2001: A Space Odyssey. Well, I can't really say 2001: A Space Odyssey introduced us to the possibility of robot going rogue, because there have been shows like Lost in Space, where we had robots that even though they weren't sentient. Star Trek also had like Nimrod. Was it Nimrod? No. Shoot, what was the name of that one? Crap. I forgot the AI computers, basically. Because this is the key factor here. Artificial intelligence. We've always perceived, especially through Isaac Asimov and others, that robots would be the ones that would gain sentience. Tron, then came HAL, from 2001: A Space Odyssey, Star Trek. They started exploring the possibility of programs having attained sentience, but it was always done through more of a machine perspective. HAL was a machine; it operated machinery. Same with some of the bad, the bad sentient computers in Star Trek and so on. Saying they were always through the context and lens of a machine gaining sentience. This was one of the first moments where one of the first instances of a program actually having sentience. In that sense. Now, yes, HAL is a program, but his context was always through the mechanical sense. He was operating a whole machine. MCP, however, was not a program that was running machines in the sense. It was a program that was hacking into machines. HAL didn't do that in 2001. The scariness of a sentient machine like HAL was definitely prevalent, but nobody ever considered the MCP being a sentient program. And Lisberger gave us a glimpse into what we know as today artificial intelligence. I mean, artificial intelligence has been around for a very, very long time, but not at this scope, where he imagined a literal computer world, and we the users are the gods. Hence why the programs in Tron talk about the users. Nobody's ever taken that into consideration, actually, and I think I don't want to say believe. I think Lisberger stumbled onto something. You know, I think William Gibson also explored the possibility with Neuromancer and others. I can't remember it off the top of my head at this point. You know, and others like him. But Lisberger put it on the screen. Like, actually put the context on the screen. And one of the key factors of why Tron is very important is because it wasn't so much ahead of its time. It was on time. It was on time because after Tron, we started getting movies like War Games with Whopper, aka Joshua, gaining intelligence and trying to understand the world, and almost brought humanity to the brink of nuclear extinction because it didn't understand the game, which was the Cold War. And we have many other movies like that following Tron. But before that, you know, we had HAL. But HAL, while a program, it was still a program that was operating a machine at a sentient level. It wasn't a program that operated at a sentient level. And I know a lot of you will try to argue, but here's the comparison. HAL did not create a deep fake like the MCP did. Watch his interaction with Dillinger. He says to Dillinger that if he didn't go along with the plan, he was going to send out newspaper, information that he did steal Kevin Flynn's video games to become CEO, and he actually put on display this AI, this MCP, this AI actually put on display an image, a deep fake image of Dillinger's face on the front page of a cover with the headlines on the newspaper saying CEO corruption. I forgot what it says, but he actually put that on display like an actual deep fake. Hal didn't do that in 2001: The Space Odyssey. Yeah, he killed people. That's what basically Hal did. He controlled he controlled all of the operations, mechanical operations and everything. But MCP actually made a deep fake. An AI actually made a deep fake of Dillinger being caught in corruption. A whole newspaper article. That's why the Tron is very important. Because what we are now doing today, this very moment, as of this video that I'm doing here, we have AI doing deep fakes. We have people getting AI doing deep fakes, making music, making art, making animation, and most importantly, making people, saying actual renditions of us. AI is doing that now. And Tron was the first one to actually show deepfake, to show actual AI deepfake. Lisberger unintentionally stumbled into a possibility that has become a possibility. It was just an imaginative possibility, but it was all there. People were, tinkering around with AI all the way back then. How computers respond to people's actions and interactions. Video games being one of those. And Lisberger here introduced us to the possibility of an entire world of sentient computer programs, acting independent of us, even though we provide them with the data to act into the program. They are all practically AI in this instance. The self-awareness, they are self-aware, and that's what AI is supposed to achieve in the long run, is that self-awareness. When was let me see here. I just want to check one thing. When was Terminator? Terminator. Because Terminator was the first time artificial intelligence was spoken of, 1984. So Tron predated that. If I remember correctly, Reese pointed out that Skynet was artificial intelligence. It became self-aware, and created a nuclear holocaust. You know, wiped out 90% of humanity. You know, that was the first instance of talking about AI going rogue, and that has always become the sum of our fears. but Tron predated it. Tron came out in 1982. If I remember correctly, it was 1982. Let's see. Do we have the year here? Let me just make sure I have my date correct. Let's see. Well, it's not going to say here. Oh, yeah. No. 20th anniversary. When was this DVD made? This is the 20th anniversary edition. Let's see. It just says 96 minutes. A milestone in the history of computer animation is not a lie, but most definitely. Let's see. No year on this one. Oh well, I guess I'll just have to dig it out. Sorry, guys. I know I'm wasting time here. It's just that, you know, you want to. You know, unfortunately, the video didn't really emphasize what was so important, and that's why I'm very disappointed with the video here, because Tron is very important, because it opened up 1982. I was right. 1982, Terminator came out 2 years later, and was one of the first instances of mentioning artificial intelligence in computers, within computers. One of the earliest instances. Tron showed us artificial intelligence. That's what's so scary about it, you know. With movies like the Terminator, later on War Games, well, you know, we only see from outside, you know, here in our real world, and watching the machines, you know, go crazy. You know, saying, you know, they gain sentience and they're ready to take us out. But here we actually get here Lisberger showed us what it would look like from the inside, what artificial intelligence would do and capable of doing, and it is very scary. The thought that this virtual world, you know, that this alleged virtual world, because we don't really know what it truly looks like, you know, what it really looks like on the inside. If at all possible, you know. And this is what Tron is all about. This is literally what is inside the microchip. You know, Lawnmower Man, you know, we see like movies like Lawnmower Man, Hackers, which didn't do a very good job. You know, it's just doing weird stuff. You know, movies like that where we see people get either sucked into the virtual world. It's always through a virtual program itself, a VR program, and so on. Tron said this is what goes on inside a microchip. This is what Lisberger envisioned would go on inside a microchip, where everybody is, you know, with circuit lines, wearing these circuit line suits, you know, and interacting with other programs and video game programs and so on. They are components of code. You know, they're literal code. This is anthropomorphized code. That's the key thing. It's not, and that's why, you know, I feel a little. As much as I enjoy Tron Legacy, and I'm sure I probably will enjoy Tron Ares, I feel like they missed what Tron was trying to convey. And that is that these are codes, anthropomorphized as human beings and other shapes interacting with each other, you know. But when I look at Tron Legacy, I see virtual reality, in a sense, you know. Kevin Flynn is trying to get humans and programs to physically interact with each other in a virtual world. But the thing is that he created a virtual world, and to me, my honest opinion, Tron Legacy missed the mark on that, because Lisberger, intentional or not, whatever it is, just what the original Tron is showing us here is that, and we have to remember, programs are lines of code, and part of the code is to utilize imagery and such. But programs that act on things are actually lines of code that are given its parameters on what to do. And this is what he believes a line of code, a set of codes would look like in human form. These are not virtual beings. That's why they're called programs. To begin with, because programs are lines of code that is supposed to create the through context, through its coding and context and the contextualization, the visual representation of what we're interacting here in the real world. See, like I'm looking at my OBS right now, and OBS is nothing but a line of code that was told to create all these things here, all these little buttons to click at and things to scroll through and so on. Same here with YouTube. YouTube is a program with a line of code that is being told to play videos and to interact with the buttons down here. These little buttons and the volume and so on. And that's all of that is within its in its coding. And that's what these guys are in the movie here. They're lines of code anthropomorphized as a form of humans to give us the representation of what they're supposed to be. That's what sets Tron apart from all of them, and even its sequels. Quite honestly, this is what Lisberger was imaginating. That's not even a word. This is what his imagination gave us. The possibility that these lines of code actually have sentience, a layer of sentience, if not absolute sentience. We saw what absolute sentience came out of MCP, and the possibility that some of the the possibility of artificial intelligence could come out of these programs in and of itself. Not so much like not so much like Grok or ChatGPT, but that these actual programs like YouTube would gain sentience and start interacting with us and start sending us communication, or OBS would gain sentience and send us communication. That's what Tron is telling us here. Tron himself, in the middle, our titular character, went to the to one of the towers, and he was communicating with his user. Same with what we saw with Flynn and Clue at the very start of the movie. We hear Flynn talking to Clue, and Clue was responding back. Clue is a program, and Clue was somehow communicating with it and acknowledging what his user was telling him. And mind you, Flynn wasn't exactly speaking in codese either, if you want to use the word. He wasn't speaking like in code, like in lines of code. He was speaking like a regular human being, and Clue was responding back in that manner. And back at that time, I could see it being incomprehensible to everybody what Lisberger was saying. But now today, with artificial intelligence and with how far computers have gone, has come from, where microchips can contain, could be this tiny and have millions, enough space to contain millions upon millions of code. It's nothing short of amazing, and it's now we're like, okay, artificial intelligence has come. Now artificial intelligence is becoming more prevalent, and it's now creating these things. And now that I look back at Tron, it's like Lisberger was ahead of us by miles. His imagination was generations ahead of us. He was generations ahead of us. I wouldn't say that he had foresight or anything. You know what I mean? That he had foresight. He probably didn't even expect that artificial intelligence would become prevalent today and everything. But the fact that he actually had the MCP show a deep fake of Dillinger in a news article, a deep fake news article of Dillinger being caught with in a corruption scandal, and his face actually was plastered on that. Yeah, we're there. We're here. We're at that point. This was 1982. All right, we're talking 43 years ago. 43 years ago. Was not a prediction. I don't believe it was a prediction. Lisberger just had the imagination of the possibilities, and now we've achieved it. We've always said this before when it came to science fiction. Quite honestly, back in the 50s and the 40s of science fiction, there were always, especially like with Star Trek, especially with Star Trek, shows like Star Trek, where we saw like the communicators, and they flipped the phone, they flipped the communicator open, like he would go, and then they start communicating. Now we ended up with the flip phones, until we of course ended up with the smartphones, in terms of communication devices and so on. We are at the throes of actually seeing science fiction once again becoming reality, and I know. My generation, Gen X, the late Gen Xer here, we Gen Xers that got to see the possibility that Lisberger presented us in Tron. We now actually got to see it come to fruition today with AI. With Grok and ChatGPT, and what people have been doing with that. Much like how our parents, that you all like to call the boomers, the baby boomers, when they had Flash Gordon and they had Star Trek, and they saw those, they saw these things, the day the Earth stood still. When they saw the communication through TV and like television communications. And Kirk pulling out the communicator and like a flip phone, and then they starting to see all that happening, in the 80s. They started seeing that type of tech happening in the 80s, and they were like, they didn't think for 1 minute, I remember my parents would be like, I never thought a minute we would ever see this type of technology actually come to become real. Now the same can be said here, with my generation, what I'm saying. Sitting here and saying, never a million years that we think that we ever believed that what we saw in Tron would actually happen. I think that's what I'm trying to get at, and why Tron is so important. Because the technology that we were presented by Lisberger is now real. What I'm saying? What was an imagination has become a reality, and we are in at the throes of that. And this was the 1980s. This was the 1980s. Now, you're probably saying, why am I emphasizing 1980s? Because in the 80s, we started getting things like the Walkman. Video games became, prevalent. The home computers now started, was slowly but surely working its way into the homes. The personal computers and such. Like, all that stuff is starting to come in. Started to come together in the 80s, but still inaccessible to many families. If you've noticed, if you watch a lot of 80s films, those who had the personal computer were from affluent homes. You didn't see, an apartment with a personal computer. A low income apartment with a personal computer. Now, low income apartments can't afford the computers when they save money and have the finances to afford it. Now everybody's got to have one. Now everybody's got a smartphone. But nobody was able to process that possibility because computers were not, everyday standard yet in the 80s. It was really more for those who had, for those who were financially set and everything. And for those who were, and only us kids in the 80s were the ones who got access to the video games, which was as close to computers as we could get, unless we had parents that got us the Commodore 64. But yeah, that's why Tron is so important. Now it is very important because it tapped into something we didn't consider back then. The possibility, the imagination. It became very much real. It's very, very real. And I say to all of you again, watch the scene with Dillinger talking with the MCP when he pulls up the newspaper. We're there. Now it's happening. And it's scary as F. It's scary as F. Skynet was just was an apocalyptic fear. You know, annihilation fear. Tron was a social fear. When MCP put that deep fake up, that's a social fear. I'm scared. Hug me. Hold me. But overall, regarding the video, it was just mostly a recap and really did not get into the nitty gritty and deepness of why Tron is so important. Unfortunately, I feel very very disappointed by that. You know, because it is important more than ever, and I believe and I really feel the original Tron, the first movie, should be rewatched and should really be put under the microscope because we're there. What the NCP did, we're there. You know, the imagination, the possibilities are all there. We're at that point now. You know, with regards to artificial intelligence. So yeah, I highly recommend watching the original Tron and really, really think hard about what was presented back in '82 and what we have now. What a great time for high technology, hey? So head on over to Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com and grab yourself a copy of The Impossible Man, a strange fantasy novel written by me. You'll find links to the book down in the description below, along with links to other merchandise, pins, stickers, t-shirts, music. Enjoy the products. Thank you for your patronage. And if you happen to have a copy of The Impossible Man and did a lore video on YouTube, thank you very much. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. And if you're interested, you can join me in my live multi-stream on Twitch and Kick every Monday through Thursday at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I do lore research, Japanese cultural studies, gaming, and more. I look forward to hanging out with you. So until the next round of Tron research, because there's probably going to be plenty of that. Who knows if I find a good video. Thank you all for joining me, and I wish you all a good night, a buenas noches, and oyasuminasai.